Have you ever wondered what it feels like to drive something with an engine so massive it could power a small building? We're talking about engines so big they make modern V8s look like toys. Engines that were built when fuel economy wasn't even a concept, and the only limit was how much metal you could fit under the hood. Today we're counting down the 10 biggest engines ever put in production vehicles, from luxury land yachts to trucks that could pull a mountain. And trust me, some of these are going to blow your mind. Before we dive in, hit that like button and subscribe if you love automotive history as much as we do. Number 10. Cadillac 500 V8, 1970 to 1976, 500 cubic inches, 8.2 liters, the largest displacement production V8 ever installed in an American car. This wasn't just an engine, it was a statement. Cadillac built this monster during the peak of the muscle car era, right before the oil crisis changed everything forever. The thing is, this engine wasn't about horsepower numbers that would impress at the drag strip. No, the Cadillac 500 was all about torque. Mountains of it, 550 pound-feet of torque at just 2,000 RPM. That's more pulling power than most modern diesel trucks. Picture this. It's 1971, and you're behind the wheel of an El Dorado. The car weighs over 5,000 pounds, it's 20 feet long, and when you touch the gas pedal, this massive engine doesn't roar or scream, it whispers. Then it moves all that weight like it's nothing. The engine was so smooth that Cadillac engineers used to balance a nickel on edge while it was running. Try that with your modern turbo four-cylinder. The 500 V8 wasn't just big for the sake of being big. It was engineered for a specific purpose: to move Cadillac's enormous luxury barges with absolute effortlessness. These weren't sports cars. They were living rooms on wheels, the El Dorado, the Fleetwood, the DeVille. These cars were built for executives who wanted to cruise from New York to Los Angeles without ever feeling the engine strain. And with 500 cubic inches under the hood, it never did. What killed this engine wasn't performance or reliability issues, it was timing. By 1973, the oil embargo hit, and suddenly fuel economy mattered. A lot. The 500 got about 8 miles per gallon in the city, on a good day, with a tailwind. Cadillac tried to keep it alive by adding catalytic converters and detuning it, but by 1976, it was over. The last 500 rolled off the line, and with it died an era when bigger was always better. Today, finding one of these engines in good condition is like finding buried treasure. They're coveted by collectors who remember when American luxury meant never having to downshift. Number 9. Packard 12, 1932 to 1939. 445 cubic inches of hand-built perfection. That's what Packard offered to the ultra-wealthy during the Great Depression. Yes, you heard that right. While most Americans were standing in bread lines, Packard was building 7.3-liter V12 engines for people who still had money, lots of it. This wasn't just an engine, it was a work of art. Each one took weeks to assemble, by hand, by craftsmen who signed their work. The Packard 12 wasn't loud. It wasn't meant to be. This was an engine designed to be felt, not heard. At idle, it was so quiet that chauffeurs would sometimes think it had stalled. The vibration was essentially non-existent. Packard engineers were so confident in their balance work that they would place a glass of water on the engine block while it was running. Not a ripple. The power delivery was like nothing else on the road. 160 horsepower might not sound like much today, but in 1932 it was astronomical. More importantly, it was how that power was delivered: linear, smooth, endless. These engines powered cars that cost more than most houses. A 1933 Packard 12 convertible sedan cost $4,000. The average American home cost less than $3,000. These weren't cars for doctors or lawyers. These were cars for industrialists, movie stars, and actual royalty. Clark Gable had one. So did Charlie Chaplin. The Soviet Union bought them for Stalin. Yes, Stalin. The communist leader rode around in the ultimate symbol of capitalist excess. The engineering that went into these engines was extraordinary for the time. Aluminum pistons when most companies were still using cast iron. Hydraulic valve lifters for silent operation. A sophisticated lubrication system that could handle extreme temperatures. Packard even developed their own special fuel mixture recommendations for optimal performance. The company suggested a blend of 70% gasoline and 30% benzol for maximum smoothness. Try explaining that to a modern gas station attendant. By 1939, the party was over. The Depression had finally caught up with even the wealthy, and a war was coming. Packard built just 5,500 of these engines over 8 years. Today, maybe a few hundred survive. Each one is worth more than the car it came in, because they represent something we'll never see again. An engine built without compromise, without concern for cost, without any consideration except being the absolute best. Number 8. Bugatti Royale. Type 41, 1927, 779 cubic inches, 12.7 liters, a straight 8 engine so massive that Bugatti originally designed it for aircraft. Then Ettore Bugatti had a different idea. He would put it in a car. Not just any car. A car for kings, literally. The Royale was meant for royalty, hence the name. Only 6 were ever built, and not a single one went to its intended market. The kings and queens Bugatti hoped would buy them were either broke from World War I or about to be overthrown. So they went to regular millionaires instead. Well, as regular as millionaires got in 1927. This engine was absurd even by the standards of the Roaring Twenties. It was over 4 feet long, just the engine. The crankshaft alone weighed 200 pounds. The entire engine weighed almost 800 pounds. That's more than some entire modern cars. It produced around 300 horsepower, which was unheard of for a road car at the time. But here's the really crazy part. It only revved to about 1,700 RPM, maximum. That's idle speed for most modern engines, yet it could push the massive Royale to over 100 miles per hour. The engineering challenges were immense. How do you cool 12.7 liters of displacement? How do you lubricate a crankshaft that long? How do you even start an engine that big? Bugatti's solutions were elegant and insane in equal measure. The cooling system held over 40 liters of water. The oil system held 23 liters of oil. Starting it required a special procedure that involved manually priming the oil system first. Then you'd better hope the battery was fully charged, because if it didn't start on the first few tries, you were done. Each Royale was different because each was essentially hand-built to the customer's exact specifications. One had a 2-door coupe body, another was a limousine. The most famous, the Coupe Napoleon, had a body that was almost as extravagant as the engine. The car was 21 feet long. It weighed over 7,000 pounds. It had a wheelbase of over 14 feet. Everything about it was excessive. That was the point. Today, all 6 Royales still exist. They're in museums and private collections, valued at tens of millions of dollars each. But here's the most incredible part. After World War II, Bugatti repurposed the remaining Royale engines for French trains. Yes, trains. They powered rail cars for decades, proving that maybe Ettore Bugatti's engine was too big for cars after all. Or maybe cars were just too small for his vision. Number 7. Pierce Arrow Model 66, 1913 to 1918. 825 cubic inches, 13.5 liters. An inline-6 engine so large it's still the biggest engine ever sold in an American passenger car. Not V8, not V12. Inline-6. All 6 cylinders in a perfectly straight line, creating an engine block over 5 feet long. Pierce Arrow didn't build this engine to prove a point or win races. They built it because their customers demanded the ultimate in smooth, silent power, and in 1913, there was only one way to get that. Make it bigger. The Model 66 wasn't just about displacement, it was about presence. When you opened the hood, which was nearly 7 feet long by the way, the engine filled the entire space. The sight of it was intimidating. Each cylinder displaced more than most complete motorcycle engines. The bore was 5 inches, the stroke was 7 inches. These dimensions were so large that Pierce Arrow had to develop entirely new manufacturing techniques just to cast the block. They actually had to build a new foundry specifically for this engine. Starting this beast was an adventure. There was no electric starter initially. That didn't come until 1914. Before that, you had to hand crank it. Imagine trying to turn over 13.5 liters of displacement by hand. It required a special technique and considerable strength. Many owners simply had their chauffeurs do it. That wasn't laziness. It was self-preservation. If the engine kicked back, which it could do with tremendous force, it could break your arm or worse. The power output was impressive for the era. 66 horsepower might sound laughable now, but remember, the Model T Ford made 20. This was 3 times that. More importantly, it was the quality of the power. Smooth, continuous, unflustered. The engine could pull the massive Pierce Arrow up any hill without downshifting. It could cruise at 60 miles per hour when most cars struggled to reach 40. And it did it all while being quieter than many modern cars. Pierce Arrow was so confident in their engineering that they offered a 3-year warranty in 1913, when most cars came with 30 days if you were lucky. Only a few hundred Model 66s were built over 5 years. Each one cost more than most people made in a decade. They were bought by tycoons, ambassadors, and presidents. President Taft had one. So did John D. Rockefeller. Today, maybe a dozen survive, and they're essentially priceless. Not because they're fast or beautiful, though they are beautiful in their own way, but because they represent the absolute pinnacle of Edwardian-era engineering. An engine built when the only limitation was imagination. Number 6. Rolls-Royce Merlin. V12 conversions, 1950s 27 liters, 1,650 cubic inches. Yes, you read that correctly. This was an aircraft engine that powered Spitfires and Mustangs during World War II. But after the war ended, thousands of these engines were surplus, and some absolutely mad individuals decided to put them in cars. Street-legal cars. Cars you could theoretically drive to the grocery store if you were completely insane. The most famous was the Rolls-Royce Meteor Special, which was basically a Rolls-Royce chassis with a Merlin engine where the passenger compartment used to be. The Merlin wasn't designed for cars at all. It was designed to power fighter planes at 30,000 feet. It produced between 1,000 and 2,000 horsepower, depending on the version. It weighed over 1,600 pounds, just the engine. It was liquid-cooled, supercharged, and ran on 100 octane aviation fuel. Putting it in a car required extensive modifications. The cooling system alone was a nightmare. Aircraft engines are cooled by air flowing at 300 miles per hour. Cars aren't. So builders had to install massive radiators, sometimes multiple radiators, just to keep the engine from melting. Starting a Merlin was a procedure, not an action. First, you had to pre-oil the engine by hand-pumping oil through the galleries. Then, you had to prime the fuel system. Then, you engaged the starter, which was often another entire engine just to start the main engine. When it finally fired up, the sound was indescribable. Not a rumble or a roar, but a smooth, deep thunder that you felt in your chest. At idle, it consumed about a gallon of fuel every few minutes. At full throttle, fuel consumption was measured in gallons per mile, not miles per gallon. Driving one of these conversions was apparently terrifying. The power was unlimited, but completely uncontrollable. There were no traction control systems, no power steering, brakes that were completely inadequate for the speeds these things could reach. One owner described it as Like riding a barely controlled explosion, the acceleration was so violent it could literally tear the tires off the wheels. Top speed? Nobody knows. Nobody was brave enough to find out. The speedometer usually gave up around 150 miles per hour, but the engine was just getting started. Today, only a handful of these conversions survive. They're not really cars in any practical sense. They're engineering exercises taken to an illogical extreme. But they represent something uniquely human, the desire to take something powerful and make it even more ridiculous. To answer the question nobody asked, what if we put a Spitfire engine in a car? The answer, it turns out, is glorious, terrifying chaos. Number 5. Bugatti Chiron W16, 8 liters, quad-turbo, 488 cubic inches of modern engineering insanity. 8 liters, 16 cylinders, 4 turbochargers, and 1,500 horsepower. This isn't just an engine, it's a statement that internal combustion isn't dead yet. While everyone else is downsizing and electrifying, Bugatti built this, a 16-cylinder monster that can push a car to over 300 miles per hour. The Chiron's engine is essentially 2 V8s joined at a 90-degree angle, creating a W configuration. But calling it just 2 V8s is like calling the Apollo program just a big firework. The numbers are staggering. 1,500 horsepower at 6,500 RPM, 1,180 pound-feet of torque from 2,000 RPM, 10 radiators to keep it cool, $60,000 just for a set of tires. Yes, $60,000. The engine produces so much heat that it has a dedicated cooling system just for the turbos, another one for the engine block, another for the transmission, another for the differential. The car has more cooling capacity than most houses have heating capacity. At full throttle, this engine consumes air at a rate that would empty a typical bedroom in under a minute. Building this engine requires techniques that didn't exist 20 years ago. The cylinder heads are 3D printed, not because it's trendy, but because it's the only way to create the complex cooling passages needed. Each engine takes over a week to assemble. By hand. By technicians who train for years before they're allowed to touch one. The tolerances are measured in microns. The quality control is so strict that Bugatti destroys engines that don't meet their standards, complete engines worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, destroyed because they're not perfect. What's really insane is that this engine is reliable. You can daily drive a Chiron if you're completely insane and have unlimited money. It'll start every morning. It'll idle in traffic. It'll cruise at 70 miles per hour at barely above idle. Then, when you floor it, it'll accelerate so hard your brain can't process what's happening. 0 to 60 in 2.4 seconds, 0 to 200 in 14 seconds. It'll reach speeds that were exclusive to race cars just a generation ago. And it'll do it with the air conditioning on and music playing through a 3,000-watt sound system. The Chiron engine represents the absolute peak of internal combustion technology. It's what happens when you throw unlimited money and the world's best engineers at a problem. Will we ever see anything like it again? Probably not. Electric motors are taking over the performance car world. But for now, for this brief moment, we have this. 16 cylinders of pure excess. A middle finger to efficiency, a love letter to the age of burning dinosaurs, for fun. Number 4. Dodge Ram 8.0 V10, 488 cubic inches of pure American truck motor. While everyone knows about the Viper V10, fewer people remember that Dodge put a massive V10 in their trucks too. From 1994 to 2003, you could buy a Ram with an 8-liter V10. It wasn't related to the Viper engine either. This was its own beast. An iron block workhorse designed for one thing, torque, mountains of it, 450 pound-feet at 2,400 RPM. This engine could pull stumps out of the ground. The development story is classic Chrysler. They needed something to compete with Ford's V10 and GM's big block V8s. But they didn't have the budget for an all-new design, So they basically took their 5.9-liter V8, added 2 cylinders, and called it a day. Except it wasn't that simple. The V10 required a completely new block, new heads, new everything really. It shared some design philosophy with the V8, but it was its own animal, and what an animal it was. 310 horsepower might not sound impressive now, but this was in a truck that could tow 13,000 pounds. Driving a V10 Ram was an experience. The engine note was unlike anything else on the road, not the scream of the Viper V10, but a deep offbeat rumble that sounded almost agricultural. Because of the odd firing order, it had a unique rhythm, kind of like a very angry tractor. But when you put your foot down, things happened. The massive torque meant you could tow almost anything without downshifting. Fifth gear, 1,000 RPM, pulling a 30-foot trailer up a grade, no problem. The V10 just churned away. The fuel economy was exactly what you'd expect, about 8 miles per gallon. Towing? 6. Maybe, if you were lucky. The fuel tank held 35 gallons and you needed every drop. But Ram owners didn't care. This wasn't about efficiency. It was about capability. And in that regard, the V10 delivered. It was virtually indestructible too. These engines regularly went 300,000 miles with basic maintenance. The iron block could take incredible abuse. Overloaded, overheated, over-revved, it didn't matter. The V10 just kept running. Today, V10 Rams are cult classics. They're sought after by people who need maximum towing capacity and don't care about fuel costs, or emissions, or polar bears. The engine was discontinued in 2003 when Dodge couldn't make it meet new emission standards. But for 9 years, you could buy a pickup truck with 10 cylinders of American Thunder. And thousands of people did. Because sometimes, too much is exactly enough. Number 3. Chrysler Viper V10, 8.4 liters, 512 cubic inches of barely controlled violence. The Viper engine started as a truck motor concept that Chrysler engineers turned into a sports car engine basically on a dare. The original 8-liter version was crazy enough. But by 2008, Chrysler had bored it out to 8.4 liters, 512 cubic inches, in a car that weighed 3,400 pounds, with no traction control, no stability management, no electronic nannies at all, just you, 645 horsepower, and your life insurance policy. This engine was all aluminum, which was a big deal for such a large displacement. It meant the engine weighed about 700 pounds instead of the 900 it would have weighed in iron. But it was still massive. The engine bay was basically all engine. There was barely room for anything else. Checking the oil required a yoga position. Changing spark plugs was a 4-hour job, but nobody cared. Because when you turned the key, 10 cylinders of American Fury came to life with a sound that made every other car in the parking lot sound broken. The power delivery was savage. Peak torque came at 5,000 RPM, but there was so much displacement that you had massive torque everywhere. Third gear at 2,000 RPM, still pulling hard. The problem wasn't making power, it was putting it down. The rear tires, even massive 345mm steamrollers, couldn't handle it. First gear was useless, second gear was mostly useless, third gear was where you could finally use full throttle without immediately spinning into a ditch. Maybe, if it was dry and warm, and you were brave. The Viper V10 didn't have technology, it had displacement, no variable valve timing, no direct injection, no turbochargers, just 10 massive cylinders sucking in air and fuel and turning it into noise and speed. It was the last of the old school, an engine designed by people who thought efficiency was a 4-letter word. The cooling system was marginal at best. The oil consumption was measured in quarts per 1,000 miles. The fuel economy was single digits, always. It was glorious. When Chrysler finally killed the Viper in 2017, they killed the V10 with it. There will never be another engine like it. Can't be. Emissions regulations make it impossible. The Viper V10 was a dinosaur, a magnificent, fire-breathing dinosaur that could hit 200 miles per hour. It was too much engine for any sane person, which is exactly why people loved it, because sometimes sanity is overrated. Number 2, GMC Twin 6 V12, 702 cubic inches, 11.5 liters of pure commercial truck insanity. In the 1960s, GMC did something that sounds impossible today. They took two of their V6 engines, welded them together at the crankshaft, and created a V12 truck engine, 702 cubic inches, the largest displacement V12 ever put in a production vehicle. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't refined. It was two engines pretending to be one, and it was absolutely magnificent in its absurdity. The Twin 6 was designed for the heaviest trucks GMC made. We're talking about vehicles with gross weights over 60,000 pounds. Trucks that needed to climb mountains fully loaded. The engine produced 250 horsepower, which sounds pathetic until you realize it made 630 pound-feet of torque at 1,600 RPM. This wasn't about speed. It was about pulling power, the kind of pulling power that could move a building, literally. These engines were used in heavy construction equipment that actually moved buildings. The engineering was crude but effective. They basically took two 351 cubic inch V6s, which were themselves enlarged versions of GMC's 305 V6, and connected them with a special coupler. Each bank of cylinders had its own carburetor, its own exhaust manifold, its own everything really. It was like having two engines that just happened to share a common output shaft. Starting it required a 24-volt electrical system because 12 volts couldn't turn over 11.5 liters. When it fired up, the sound was unlike any other engine, a deep, smooth rumble that shook the ground. What's crazy is that some people put these in custom vehicles, hot rods, muscle cars, even boats. Imagine a 1968 Camaro with 11.5 liters of V12 under the hood. It happened. Not many times, but it happened. The engine was so large it required massive modifications to fit in anything smaller than a full-size truck. But when it fit, the results were spectacular. Not fast in the traditional sense, but unstoppable. The torque was so immense that it would either spin the tires or break something, usually both. The Twin 6 was only produced from 1960 to 1965. Emissions regulations and the cost of production killed it. GMC replaced it with diesel engines that were more efficient and almost as powerful, but nothing ever matched the character of the Twin 6. It was an engine that shouldn't have existed, two engines masquerading as one, a solution to a problem that nobody else would have solved this way. Peak American engineering madness. Today, finding a running Twin 6 is nearly impossible. They're almost all gone, worn out from decades of hard work. But the legend lives on, the biggest, craziest V12 ever put in something with wheels. Number 1, Cadillac V16, 7.4 liters, 452 cubic inches, 16 cylinders, 8 carburetors. In 1930, while America was entering the Great Depression, Cadillac decided to build the most complex, most expensive, most excessive engine ever put in a production car. The V16 wasn't just an engine, it was a statement, a declaration that Cadillac could out-engineer anyone. Packard had a 12, Cadillac would have a 16. It was automotive one-upmanship taken to its ultimate conclusion. The engineering was extraordinary for 1930, or 1990, or today, honestly. The V16 was essentially two straight 8s mounted on a common crankcase at a 45-degree angle. Each bank had its own exhaust system, its own intake manifold, its own everything. The engine was over 3 feet long and weighed nearly half a ton. It produced 165 horsepower, which was astronomical for the era. But the power wasn't the point. The silence was. At idle, The V16 was quieter than most electric motors. Cadillac engineers claimed you could hear a watch ticking from 10 feet away with the engine running. The complexity was staggering. 16 cylinders meant 32 valves, 32 spark plugs, 16 connecting rods, 16 pistons. The ignition system had 2 distributors. The cooling system required special thermostats to balance flow between the 2 banks. Starting it required a special procedure to ensure oil reached all 16 cylinders. Maintenance was so complex that Cadillac had to train special mechanics just for this engine. A full tune-up could take days. A rebuild required skills that maybe 100 people in the country possessed. Each V16 Cadillac was essentially hand-built. The engine alone took weeks to assemble. The bodies were custom-made by coach builders like Fleetwood and Fisher. The price was astronomical. A V16 Cadillac cost over $9,000 in 1930. The average annual income was less than $2,000. These weren't cars for successful businessmen. They were cars for people who owned successful businesses. Plural. Al Capone had one. So did Marlene Dietrich. The Vatican ordered one for Pope Pius XI. Between 1930 and 1940, Cadillac built exactly 4,076 V16 engines. They lost money on every single one. But that wasn't the point. The V16 was about prestige, about showing the world that Cadillac could build something nobody else could, or would. It was magnificent excess in mechanical form, an engine that made no financial sense, no practical sense, no sense at all except as a pure expression of engineering capability. Today, surviving V16s are among the most valuable collector cars in the world. Not because they're fast, not because they're beautiful, though they are, but because they represent the absolute pinnacle of American automotive ambition. 16 cylinders of pure, unapologetic excess, the biggest, most complex, most outrageous engine ever put in a production car, and we'll never see anything like it again. And there you have it. 10 engines that prove bigger was definitely better, at least until gas prices became a thing. From 16 cylinders of Depression-era defiance to modern 16-cylinder hypercars that cost more than your house, these engines represent humanity's eternal desire to answer the question nobody asked. How big can we make it? Which of these mechanical monsters would you want under your hood? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this trip through Automotive Excess. Hit that notification bell too, and we'll see you next time with more stories from when engineers had no limits.